All right, so welcome back. It's COMP125 in the summer 2018 semester at Centennial, and we are week 10, part 2 of our broadcast. We're talking about AJAX part 2. My previous recording failed. So people who are watching this, they're going to be like, oh, man. Yeah, so we did something in class, and I'm going to share the final result with you. Unfortunately, I can't do the whole thing. But what we did was we created this idea of an insert HTML function. With the insert HTML happened from last week. We corrected the problem from last day, which was we had to put in our XHR object here. So that's underneath inside the insert HTML function. And we had to replace the XHR keyword with the this keyword. That's what we did. And we put that up on GitHub already. All right, so that's the first part. And then we started thinking about other things. We started thinking, well, what if I make a router? And what that means is I want to be able to create a single page application. And my single page application will just inject my content. So this is my content. And this is for your lab 8 or 9, lab 9. Lab 9, I want you to inject content, right? But what I did was I set up this set page content function, which is all it does is it calls the insert HTML, right, based on the content changing. And we can detect the content changing by using something called the hash change event on the window object. But in order for us to do that, in our index.html, in our header.html, we ended up changing the links so that each of them had a hashtag in front of them. So every time we click on a link, home, about, contact, the hashtag and the URL changes, right? But then we found that, the hashtag URL on the actual URL line there on our website looks really ugly. So we want to sanitize that a little bit. And I sanitize that by when I set the page content, right? What I want to do is when I route, I slice the hashtag off. I take the hashtag and remove it with this slice method. And we did this all in class, and I do apologize. I can't go through all that again. But really what this does is it sanitizes the hash or the URL, right? And what I do is I remove the hashtag. That's what I'm doing here. Okay. I can't re-record. No time. But so I want to sanitize the hashtag. That's what I'm doing. So this is the line that does that sanitization stuff, right? So what it does, it takes the hash, which is part of the location object. It's basically a string, and I remove, or I create a substring of that, which is starting from position 1 as opposed to position 0, because strings start at position 0 because a string is a character array, right? And then I start at position 1, and so I ignore the hashtag, which is at position 0, and I store that new string inside the hash variable. That's what I'm doing, okay? And then I set my document title to the hash. This is an important step because this is what I'm going to do when I change the link, the active link. I use my document title to change the active link. All right. I'm using the history.pushDate method to change my URL. This is what actually changes the look of my URL. So change the URL, right, of my page. That's what it does. This removes whatever the hashtag is. If I was to take this away again, just to show you, if I took this away and I go back to my active example, you can see now that if I click the about page, I have this little hashtag, and I don't want that. I want my hashtag, my link, and notice it kind of added it on to home somehow, right? Because it's confused. It doesn't know what I want, right? But I really want to do this, right? So if I click about, I have this ugly about, and that's no good. So if I put this, if I use the history object, clean it up, and if I refresh the page, so by taking this away, just for a second, and I click on home or about or contact, it actually replaces the URL, it cleans it up, it sanitizes it to make it look the way I want. That's what this history object does. And then I made a new function called setPageContent. Remember? That setPageContent is I'm going to pass in the URL that I'm going to build based on the hashtag. So if the hashtag is home, I'm going to take the hashtag, make it lowercase for sure, and add .html. So I'm composing the URL. That's what I'm doing here. And I'm passing it into the setPageContent function, which is a very simple function, right? And then all I'm going to do is take that new URL and use the insert HTML function, which I wrote up here with you guys, which uses AJAX to load that piece of content and inject it inside of our main tag, which is inside of our index.html. So the only thing that's in index.html now is a couple of tags, a header tag or header element, a main element, and a footer element with nothing inside of it. And we're injecting everything with our AJAX. Okay, and that's really the exercise that I wanted to go over with you guys today before I go back to JSON data. Okay, questions around this, because this is a big one. I'm going to put the details up on GitHub so you can see the final solution on GitHub, right? So if you look, I'm just going to add this in. I'm going to just say created simple, very simple, because there's still some issues, routing scheme. And then really this is front end. It's really like front end or client side routing. Client-side routing, right? And routing means it just changes the route, whatever it is on the top, right? And it makes the user think that they're moving from one page to the other when we're really not. We're having the same index.html page and we're injecting content. That's what we're doing, okay? And it's happening quick, right? It's really happening quick. You can't tell. The speed is like lightning fast. There's nothing loading. I don't have to load a new page. The biggest slowdown to using a page is I have to physically load the page from the operating system. I'm making that request response, right, guys? Request response. I don't have to do that request response for the entire page. I don't have to load the entire page. I load parts of the page, and I keep the parts that are already there. I'm not reloading my navigation. I'm not reloading my footer bar. I'm only loading up my content. The footer and navigation remains the same. Yeah. I did. So it should be up on GitHub. Let me just go there to make sure that went, because we've had some really weird issues with GitHub lately too. Yeah, it's under. It's right here. There's fourth commit. It says. So if I go to that, so the changes are well, that's weird. Yeah, it says it was an hour ago. I didn't push. Pushing now. How about that? It's one of those guys. It's just like it's nonstop technical issues today. It's like, who cares, right? It's okay. Yes, yesterday I had the unicorn, right? Today or Monday. Monday I had the unicorn. Right, today it's this, right? It's okay. Don't worry about it. Yes, the show must go on, right? That's how it is, right? So yeah, so if you look on GitHub, there's 5 commits now, and the one that's the latest one is created simple client-side routing, which is what I did here, okay? So you can take a look at this for if you wanted to try and do the same thing. So why am I showing you this? Like some people, if you talk to other professors, they're like, Tom, that's a really advanced concept. Yes, it is, but this is what we do with AJAX nowadays. We don't just load data with AJAX. We can use AJAX for a bunch of things. And this is one of the main things that the front-end frameworks use. For example, AngularJS and React.js and even Vue.js uses this idea of, they have their own routing system that you can kind of implement, right, on the front end. And usually it's Angular that does more of that than anything else.
So will that be doing the server-side routing?
We might have a chance to do that in week 12. Let's see. So if I go back to my PowerPoint, I've covered all this part, and it tells you how kind of a step-by-step if you go through this on ready state change. This is the old way of doing it. This is right from the book. On ready state change is add event listener ready state change. That's exactly the same way. It uses this combined request ready state and status in one line. This works just fine too. I just split it up over 2 lines. Okay, that's what I've done. I'm just going to go through it a little bit more to make sure that I covered everything that you need.
Is there some latest ebook available?
A PDF of what?
Some book that covers
routing?
Yeah.
No. Not that I know of. All right. So now we want to do the same thing with our JSON data, right? Because one of the things that I've asked you guys to do in your assignment number 3 is load JSON data, right? So I've got my JSON data. Now you can have, remember, AJAX can load XML, and AJAX can also load JSON data. And so far what we've done is we've just load HTML data, which is something that, that's kind of a good thing to know how to do, right? And it talks about positives and negatives. right, about different file formats. I'm going to go over that. So let me just go back to XML. So XML basically says the positives are it's an extensible format. You can use XML to store your data. Yeah.
Would you please upload the PowerPoint instead of?
Maybe later.
Yeah, please.
It's the same content though.
No,
so
but we can use it.
not important right now. Let's move on. So again, because I got to go through this. I only have 20 minutes left. So positives of XML is it's pervasive. There's a lot of XML out there, and the great thing about that is it uses its own DOM. XML has its own document object model, right? So what you can do is you can search for tags inside of XML, just like you do in the HTML document object. All right, so you can go through it and do the same things, and which is kind of cool. That's the positive thing. On the downside, right, negatives. You can see the negatives are a whole page. It's very similar to HTML. It's also got a bunch of tags in here that are embedded. It's a much heavier, more wordier, verbose way of saving everything from a data perspective. And so that's become the big negative. You can also use HTML, right? HTML is totally fine. The positives, lots of speed, right? As an example, when using HTML, we just saw that. Negatives, you know, as a data source, you can do it, right? But the challenge are you don't have, it doesn't actually create the data structures for you, right? You have to actually interpolate the data yourself, okay? I would love to be able to have data that I use to load with AJAX. And when I load something with AJAX, once I've done that, it takes that JSON data and actually creates a data structure for me, right? As opposed to, or I can attach my JSON data as a data structure into my code, right? That would be nice. And then I can use it, you know, inside of my code. That's the nice thing. Advantage of JSON, it looks like JavaScript. That's the first thing, right? And it has a data structure. That's the advantage, right? On the downside, right? So the syntax is not exactly the same, right? Sometimes people, you know, have an issue with the way it works, and also sometimes from a security perspective, you can inject malicious scripting inside your code, right? Because it's an open standard, and if you know there's an API, an application programming interface that uses JSON, I can replace the JSON that you're getting with my own, right? And if I do that, then I can inject whatever I want, which can cause a security problem, okay? So that's what this part says. All right, so let me just go through. So again, I can use the JSON.parse to convert my string to an object, right? If I just leave it as my response text, if I leave it as is, it's just a string, right? And I used inner HTML to convert it to an HTML object, right? That I injected into my code right now. So going back, if I want to use it as, I want to inject my JSON data as an object, I want to read it. This is my data.json, right? A very simple address book. And I want to read this thing and I want to put it inside of my code somehow, right? So I want to kind of read my address book. I need an address book structure, right? And I need to create a couple of objects. Okay, we have 15 minutes. What's the right thing to do, guys? You just, last week and the week before, you learned all about object-oriented programming. What should I do if I want to hold, you know, an array of address books? I could make a class, and then I can make an array of objects based on that class, array of contacts. So I can make a contact class, right? And my contact class could have a name and a number, right? A name and phone, or maybe an email, right? Would be another thing I can have. Like, let's add an email address. So I'll say, this is my structure. So email could be, you know, tom@example.com. And I'll make sure I put the comma. This is a very important thing. You must adhere to this structure for your JSON, right? Because it's got to look like this. Notice that I have outside, this part here for JSON is an outside object, right? A property that has, it's an array. That's what this thing is. Array of objects. And let's add another one in. So I'll say my email for the other person is john@example.com. So I'm modifying my structure a little bit. So there we go. That's my address book. And I can add other ones. So I have two objects. But I want to load this up in my address book, right? So the easiest thing to do without making any class is to do the following. And by the way, this is not easy, right? So let's make something called address book. Okay, so this is address book. And what I want to do here is I want to create another function called load JSON. Load JSON, right? And now again, I could make it more generic. So it loads any JSON file I want. I'm going to make it specific. So it loads only one JSON file. Okay. And I'm going to use the same structure. It's going to look almost like this. So I'm going to take the same stuff, copy it, and put it inside here. I don't need a target right now. I do need this. I do need this. I do need all this. But instead of I don't need a set active link. I don't care about this. And my source URL is going to be the exact same every single time because it's my test. It's going to be data.json. That's my source URL because that's what I'm loading, right? And my target.innerHTML, that's not going to be right. What I want to do is I want to parse this .response text. Like I want a JSON.parse, which I did before. So I want to say JSON.parse this .response text. I want to do that. And I want to save it as an object. So I can do a, I want to save my address book, right? Address book is equal to JSON.parse this object. So address book is this, right? Notice that it's this, right? Address book. Address book is equal to JSON.parse. I'm taking the response text and I'm parsing it to make it look like JSON, and I'm returning it inside address book. Okay. But we've never called load JSON. We'll do that in our main somewhere. In our main, below everything else, we'll load JSON. Load JSON, right? And inside load JSON, just so we can see what it is, we'll output the address book at the end, right? So I don't know, maybe down here we'll say console.log address book. Now be careful. Look at this. I'm changing the ready state again, right? I'm rewriting the ready state over and over again, right? So going back, it says, so first of all, data.json, see where it says data.json, there it is not found. Why is that? Because it's actually in the root. So it's like / data.json. And there it is. Look at my address book. This is what I actually loaded my stuff in my address book, right? And there's my two things, my 2 pieces of data, right, in my address book. Okay. So that's how easy it is. I can actually take data that's stored in a file. In your case, you're going to take data that's, instead of like paragraph, it's going to be called paragraph.json. And your paragraph data is going to have many different kinds of, you're going to decide which paragraph it is. You can make your own property for each of the paragraph. And you're going to take that file. So now that I have this address book, and if I want to print out part of it, so down inside after I load JSON, I could say something like console log. I want to print out my address book somewhere else. Now, I don't have any linkage to this, but I could say in my address book itself, let's see what I got here, by the way. I got something called an address book capital, right? So this is kind of weird, right? Because I have address book, right? And so address book itself, the way I've loaded it up, the whole address book is loaded into this object here, right? That's what I'm doing. But what I really want to do is I want to kind of go through this JSON object. I'm going to get, I can parse through it. I can do it for each object inside my address book. I can look through it. How do I do that? Because right now I have an array of structures, right? I have an array of structures. Well, one thing I don't have, I mean, right now I have my name, as an example, my number, and so on, right? And really, if I really want to set up an address book properly, I should have the name of my contact, right? Now this structure is like the first element, the second element of my array, and so on. I've got an address book with an array. But can I actually do a piece of JSON data without this? Do I really need a name for my array. So can I do this? Right? No, I can't. Right? Can I do this in JSON data? Can I just put in some random objects? No. You can see that that's not the way it works. Could I name each object? Right? Can I say that the name of the first object is Tom? Right? And the name of the second object, right, is John. Can I do that? No. Well, this doesn't matter. This is okay. This Tom, see how Tom and John works? I can name both objects, and if I did this and saved it, and if I go back to my example, let's go back to this for a second. So let's just do address book. I'll get rid of that for a second. I want to see what I get here now with my address book. So the way you save your data is important too, right? So this is my data, and if I go back and refresh, I can see now that I have two objects, Tom and John. Here's my John object, here's my Tom object. That's different. So I can make it an array, or I can make it individual objects. Right, yes?
Can you save that, also put that in a scope that would have something like that? This is
Context.
Yeah, context.
Yeah, you can do that. So I can say addressbook.context.tom, addressbook.context.whatever, and it's an associative way of looking at it. It's not an array though, right? So that's the one thing I haven't done that. I haven't made it an array, right? But you can store data in your in the file any way you like. So if you're going to store your data, which you're going to use for your paragraphs, you can say paragraph 1, paragraph 2, paragraph whatever you want, and then whatever information you want inside that, right? Okay, but what about for this example? What's the right thing for me to do? Should I do it this way with Tom and John and whatever, or would it be better for an array? My recommendation, guys, array is always the better way to go, right? So if I undo, let's undo the way, go back to where it was. But instead of address book, just for our sake, we'll call it contacts, right? That's better. So what we have is address book then is an array of contacts, right? So we have contacts, which is an array that has two objects. So I could, in my mind, I can now start delineating which of the objects I want. I want to go through this array, right? So way to do that is, if I go back to my code, again, this is just the way you set it up, okay? Like you can set this up the way you like. I can loop over all of my contacts and print them out separately. So down in here, I could say something like, for each, and my array is going to be address book dot contacts, because contacts is the array, not address book. Address book is the actual container. It's the object. It's the outside object, right? And contacts is my array that I have inside address book. Address book dot contacts, for each contact, I want to console log a contact individually, right? So I don't want to show the whole structure. I want to see each individual contact, one after the other. I don't know how many there are, but let's see if this works. Okay. So it says, uncaught type error, cannot read property context of undefined. Why would this be the case? But then suddenly it does it in app.js 68. So here, addressbook.contacts for each, right? And if you look at my structure, back to my JSON object, data.json, I have contacts, right? And if I go back to my console, you can see that there's the contacts. So I did this part. It actually prints out the contacts. So I have an array, and inside the array, inside the object, here's my object, and the object is named contacts. The array is called contacts, right? So it's the contacts array. Just saying, right? And if I try to do it the other way around, there's some issues. If I try to do it the other way around where I don't name my contacts, so I don't do, so I'm just going to go to the right place, which is, where did I miss it here? In my main. So if I don't do this, if I try and do this for each in my address book is not an array, right? If I try to do this, then I'm going to get an error that says, cannot read property for each of undefined, right? And here's another thing that happens is address book itself, I've defined it. It's way up here. Here's my address book. But what's happening is, so question for you guys is this, right? If I did it here, does address book compute? Address book does not compute because loading JSON happens asynchronously again. So I'm trying to access the address book at the same time that I'm loading it. That's the problem, my friends. Whenever we use AJAX, we got to wait till the thing is finished loading. And when it's finished loading, then I can use it. And so I can create another event that waits for the AJAX to load, right? There's the load event. And when it's done, I can update my address book, right? Or I can take that same idea and put it inside of my load JSON, right? I can call another function from this. When this is done, as an example, so this is all done and everything is finished. At the bottom here, if I did the same thing, if I said address book, so console.log is here is address book, right? But you know that this is working. So can I do the same thing? Can I say like console.log on the bottom, address book .context? Can I do that? Because we don't know. I mean, the one thing that we don't know is what the structure of our data file is. JavaScript doesn't know the structure of your data file. You've got to create your loader on your own, right? So if I did this, it says, well, I don't know what context is, right? Okay. Let's keep looking. Let's try and figure this out, right? So how about if I go and just press address book? How does this work? It says undefined. I'm here. I'm not in here, right? So this runs, and this is waiting for this to load, and it hasn't finished loading, and I'm trying to access it. So let's do that over here. Let's try this again. So if I said address book, context here in this particular place. Can I load it? And the answer is yes. Everything I'm trying to do is working. Now I have an array, that's what context is, of 2 objects. Okay, and now I can do that funky print statement. I can do that for each. I can say that for each address.context, just like we did before, right? For each of these, actually it's the other way around. Do for each. And whenever you type for each, the one thing that we get here inside of Visual Studio Code is the ability for us to do for each, right? And so I can put the array in here. So I can say that address book, right? Address book dot context. That's the array, and the element will be the contact. For each contact, do a console log. And now what this is going to do is going to do this. Here's my 2 objects individually, right? I'm sorry I'm going fast, but just to get you to understand this, maybe we'll hit maybe we'll hit it again next week, just to help you guys out. But the reason why it didn't work down here, and the reason why it didn't work in main, but it's working in here, is because we're not finished loading yet. Until we're finished loading, that object is not available. And that's the thing you have to understand about this asynchronous stuff. It loads, it accesses everything at the same exact time. So if I say, hey, load this JSON stuff, and I try and access the address book that I'm defining already, the address book is actually empty because it hasn't been loaded yet. I have to wait for it to finish loading in order for me to use it. So there's nothing wrong with doing this in a function that I call from in here.
Do we need some load event?
Sorry? I could do a load event too. Like, for example, the XHR object, has an onload, right, event, onload. So when it's finished loading, right? So what I can do is I can say something like, I can add event listener. So when it's finished loading, like this, I can say the load event. When it's finished loading, then I could do this function in here. I can do another function in here and pull this information down in here. I can say that, take this information when it's done loading, and I can do the same stuff that I just did in here, right? So I'm going to use an event listener to do this, right? Let's see if that works. So that's the one thing I can do. And I can pull this anywhere I want. I can take this out, right? Now this is, you gotta be careful here, right? Because if I pull it out of here, and if I put it down in main, it's gonna have some funky effects again. Why? Because depending on where I put it, if I put it here and I go back, it's still good, right? So when it's finished loading, this is waiting for everything to finish loading. And then when I'm done loading, I can use it. Because this waits until my files are loaded in order for me to use it, right? If I just try and use it by itself, I don't know when it's loaded because the call is being done asynchronously. I'm accessing a bunch of stuff all at the same time and trying to access the object before it actually exists. Whereas if I wait till I get the stream of data when it's finished loading, just like I did my load event from my window object, this window.load object, if I wait for JSON to finish loading, right, and then I use my address book.contacts, it's all good. We're all golden because then the object exists. Any questions around that? That's the thing that people lose, when they don't understand the load event. And I'm using the load event of the XHR object, the XML HTTP request object. If I listen for this to load, then I can do whatever I want with the data.
This XHR, this name is still retained just for historical purposes, because here we are not using an XML, we are using JSON.
XML HTTP request is the object that we use for AJAX, but yes, the answer is yes. It's just historical. Really, you could just put AJAX. That's what it is, right? And again, it used to be called asynchronous JavaScript and AJAX, and I don't recommend you call it that anymore. Just call it AJAX. All right, because there is no XML. We don't use XML, right? So does that make sense, what I did here? Because I know people are confused when you first start doing this. If I go back and try and do something here in my load JSON file, right? Even if I'm inside the same function, and until this is done loading, my address book has no value. My address book is undefined, in fact, until I do something with it, okay? And then you can go back and talk about what you talked about, which is if you want to create a class of contacts, then what I can do down here is for every contact in contacts, I can take I can actually disassemble. I can start assembling my new object, right? I can start assembling my new object of class contact. And if you really want to do a quick example, there's no one out there, so I don't know. If you want to do a quick example of this, do you have a second more? Here's the example. So let's do that. So in my scripts core, I'm going to make a new folder called objects. And in my folder called objects, right, I'm going to go in there and make a new class, a new file, right? So we're going to call this contact. And then we're going to make that module structure, right? We're going to say that the let objects be a thing, right? And we're going to pass in objects into my IFI, right? That's what we're going to do. And out of it as well, objects or objects is equal to some kind of object. It's the module syntax, okay? Bear with me. And then inside of objects, we can create our class. We're going to use a new class syntax, which we're going to call contact, right? The contact class is not going to extend anything, but it's going to have a constructor, right? And in my constructor, I'm going to have two optional components or three optional components. I'm going to have a name, which is going to be equal to some kind of optional component, a number, which is also going to be optional, and a email, which is also going to be optional, right? And then what I'm going to say is, I'm going to say that this dot name, right, is equal to name. This dot number is equal to number. This dot email is equal to email. Right? So that's my constructor notation, right, for my contact. And once I have this information, I can go to objects.contact is equal to contact. So I'm actually exposing that contact object outside of my objects module, right? That's what this does. It exports it, right, if you will. And once I've done this, then I can make new contacts, right? And if I really want to go crazy, which of course I always do, that's the kind of guy that I am, I can make a new object called contacts. We'll call it capital C contacts, right? And I want to make this an array, right? So I could say that inside of my start function, I could say that, well, contacts is equal to an array. It's a new array, right? And of course, I'm going to make an array of contacts, right? Of contact objects. So inside here, instead of console.logging contact, what I really want to do in addition to this is say something like contacts, right? Well, we'll say that let new contact equal to objects.contact, and we're going to pass in the contact information. So contact.name, contact.number, and contact.email, right? That's the new contact. And we're going to output, we're going to attach it to the contacts object, or the contacts array. So we're going to say contacts, right, dot push contact, new contact. Okay. And just to be sure, if I want to print, instead of contact, I want to print out new contact. So see the difference between one and the other. And let's see if it's, oh yeah, and of course I have to, in my index.html, before my stuff, I actually include my contact class, right? Because I forgot to do that, which is scripts, dot objects, and contact. If I don't do that, then nothing shows up. And it says the contact cannot be invoked without the new keyword. Did I not do that? Yes, of course. And it says contact, right? There's my new contact. So each of the contacts looks like this. It's a new object of type contact, right? And it says contacts looks like this, right? There's each of my contacts. And now if I want to look at my contacts array, just to be sure, at the end of this, if I say, okay, print out my contacts. So console log contacts. So let's see the whole thing. Then it looks like this. So I have a object. I have an array of two contacts, right? And now I have it inside of a structure that I manage. That's based on the JSON data that comes from my file. And if I change my file, this will be automatically updated. So if I add another contact, so let's add another one really quickly. They're going to get mad at me outside. So Jane Doe. Jane 7. And save it and refresh. And you're going to see now that I have 3 contacts immediately, right? It automatically loads, and it's inside of my structure. And that is the basis for, for how we do things with data, having data display in our website. One thing we haven't done is we haven't put this data inside of a list, which we're going to do next week. Okay? Questions before we go? I'm going to put this up on GitHub so you have everything. I know it's difficult stuff, guys, and I do apologize, especially for the recording. Added recent data. And let me just kill the recording. See you next day.